Okay, so I think we had a 15 minutes break, so it should be enough. Okay? So, let's restart from the point where we left. Okay, so we had Express. Okay, Express is a library that can implement a web server for us in the Node.js environment. Okay, so we installed the package Node in Node. So indeed, this Express package, it is a library, is the JS and so on. Okay, and I told you how to use it. It's very simple. After importing, create an object, you define routes. So what you want to handle in your web server, slash something else, and so on. So the APIs, as we're going to see in a few minutes. And then last instruction, you activate the server. You need to decide a port that's a TCP port. And of course, it's a TCP port on the machine where the server is running. Okay, I cannot listen at the Politecnico IP address and so on. I need to have the IP address on my network interface. Okay, so basically, I'm not saying anything about the address. And so basically, it is listening on the local network interface, and you know that Linux and other systems has a sort of internal virtual network that is it is available to all applications, and that's why the server responds at the localhost URL, okay? Because localhost points through the internal virtual network in the computer to the same computer, okay? Okay, good. So actually, before the break, I was showing you the code. Actually, I forgot, sorry, today I'm not feeling that well. I mean, there was an even simpler file, okay? I showed you the other one, the index, which is more complex, and that's what we are going to see after 1 hour after discussing APIs and so on. So this is exactly what you saw on the slides, okay? So the 4 instructions: import, new object, route, activate, okay? Here it sends, hello Antonio, okay? We can test it again. So Node, first example, server ready, and open the browser, localhost, it was 3001, I hope. No, 3001. So, okay, and remember, always keep this developer section open in your browser. I will do it at the exam as well. It's the first thing I do when I test your application. Do the same in the lab, okay? Of course, we can come to you and help you and so on, but then when you're developing the project for the exam, you're alone, okay? Always have this debugger open. It doesn't cost you anything, okay? It just reduces the part of the page a little bit, okay? But it's very, 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 very useful to understand what's going on at the network interface for the browser, that is the client, toward the server, okay? So again, you see, get HTTP localhost 3000, request, empty, that's a body, it's empty, and the response row just bytes, okay? You want to see the header, you have the header tab, etc., etc., okay? Good. What happens in case you take another port? I mean, actually, nothing happens. It's a request, but there's no response, right? You cannot find the response. There's no server running on port 3001, okay? So the client sent a request, and nobody answered. It might happen on the internet as well, right? So what you see here is just generated by the browser. Oops, here. I think it just says, okay, I'm unable to connect, do something else. Check if the URL is correct and all this stuff, okay? Okay, fine. Let's discuss the rest that is needed for for developing our web server and our API server in particular. Okay, so I go back one slide. How to run the Express server, node index.mjs. Okay, until the application crashes or is interrupted by the user, it runs. Okay. If you modify something, you need to stop and restart. It's a JavaScript script. It's JavaScript code, okay? So it does not get reloaded automatically, and this is quite annoying when you are developing the server, right? So there's a useful package which is called node monitor. Basically, we can install it with this command npm install -g nodemon. That install the package globally. That's the only package you should install globally. All the rest is local to the project, okay? Because we need to replicate the same environment of your project at the exam. So it must go inside the package JSON, okay? So let's do it. Let's do some tests, okay? You see, node, first example. Okay, 3000, and we get hello Antonio. We modify it, hello Enrico. I mean, my colleague is not here, right? I save the file, I do the request, hello Antonio. Why? Because the JavaScript has been already read and executed. It's in execution, okay? I cannot change the code while it is executing. I must stop the server and rerun the server, okay? Now we test it. Hello Enrico, okay? It's very inconvenient, right? Every time you do a modification, you save, you need to stop and start the server, okay? So if there is a package that does it for you, that's better. So npm install -g nodemon. -g means global, okay? So it will not go inside the package JSON. It's just installed for the whole applications running on my computer. That is more convenient because basically I need it in all projects. You can install it locally as well. I mean, it's not mandatory to install it globally. But if you install it locally, basically every time you create a new project, you need to install that package as well. Up to you. I mean, it's fine. Okay. I think you need the super user permissions. Okay. So we give the super user permission because install it globally in a folder that can be written only by the super user. And so at this point, I think you see here, you see there's no nodemon because we install it in another place globally, okay? But just for convenience. And now we run the same command, exact same command with nodemon, okay? Okay, it prints something more, but basically it does the same. Of course, now it's Enrico. That's in the code. Hello, Antonio again. Okay, save the file. Of course, you need to save the file. There's no other option. Let's save it. I do it with the menu so you can see it in the recording. Okay, you see the server has restarted automatically. So basically nodemon is monitoring all the files in your server, and if it detects something has changed, it reloads the server. So basically it's like stopping and restarting node automatically. Okay, and so you see hello Antonio. So the latest version of your server. Just be careful if you save something that doesn't work, it tries to run the server, it doesn't work, it will stop. Okay. But I mean, in development, it might happen, no problem. At the exam, we don't want any of these things to happen. We run the server once, and it should work until the end of the exam, okay? So actually, for the exam, okay, we can run nodemon or node, it doesn't really matter. We say, okay, nodemon is installed because maybe you like to use nodemon, but I mean, at the server, it shouldn't happen that you need to modify the server, okay? Because it should be a finished project, a project that is working well, okay? Good. So we tested the first simplest web server, and now we see a few things. So how do you add a route, so a new path, a new URL? Well, you need to use the method, can be get, post, put, delete, define the path in terms of a string, and provide a function, as we did, right? Slash, and a function that takes two parameters, request and response. A response object will have a few methods, including setting the state, the HTTP state, including some information in the response body, and so on. Okay? Good. So these are the most common methods to be used in the request. Well, later on we will check what's available inside the body, the method that has been used, but this is less useful because we already know it, because we declare it when we added the route. The params, because some URLs can be parametric, can include information that changes depending on the request. Like, I want to buy the item number 3 or 5 or 6. Of course, we are not going to write an handler for each one of the numbers. We're just writing an handler that takes this parameter, and depending on the value of this parameter, it will perform the action. Okay? Query the same. Okay. So that's what you can use to send back something. Send a string, but I mean, apart from this simple example, not very useful. The one that is very, very useful is JSON. We just pass a JavaScript object, array or object, or even just a string or a number. It will be converted into a JSON format, so into a string that can be parsed as a JSON data structure. Okay? We're going to see JSON in a minute. Or res end, just to say, okay, answer without a body. That's possible. Okay, there are methods that are not required to give a body. Delete. I mean, delete was successful or not, you can communicate it with the status code. 200 or some other status code that says there's been an error. Nothing else to say. No body, res end. Okay? Just send back the response. That's all. Okay. So that's the explanation. Okay? Download, not so much useful. So how to stop the server? Ctrl-C. Just be careful that sometimes you lose the terminal when you run the server, but the server is still running. Okay? So just some advice how to stop it on Linux. And there could be a similar command on the Mac OS and another similar command on Windows. Okay? On Windows, it's not recommended because we say use the VSL. So it's basically Linux, so the same command works. Okay? So you just need to find the process ID and say terminate the process. Okay? Why? Because you cannot run two TCP servers on the same port. Remember that. I mean, this is just basic computer network classes, okay? I mean, the port of TCP, UDP, and TCP, but TCP in this case acts as a demultiplexer of the requests, right? So you can run multiple servers on the same host, on the same machine, okay? What's the difference between the multiple servers? The port on which they are listening. So if a program is listening on a certain TCP port, it keeps that port occupied. The operating system cannot run another server on the same port. Because if it receives a packet on a certain port, it doesn't know which program should handle the request, right? You have two servers, and do I pass the request to the first or the second program? No idea. So you cannot run more than one server on the same port. Okay, same host and same port. So it means that, let's try, just to, you see, there's one running, we say, on 3000, okay? So let's open a second terminal. Week 03, QA server, node, first, no. Yeah, that's bad, right? But it's not running, okay? Why is it? Because I didn't print the error, okay? And then it terminates. So Not a very good example, right? R. Okay, the suggestion is nice. You see, there's an error. A callback takes an error. So next example will be better coded, okay? So error, listen, in use. Others already in use, port 3000. You cannot run a second server. You go to the first one, you stop it, you go to the second, you run it, and it will run. The second one, here. Okay? And now the first cannot be run, right? Just one. But this is very basic because it's not when it's waiting, okay? But the issue is exactly the same, okay? Just one server on a port. Of course, you can change port, but for the exam, we require a specific port, again, just for simplicity, okay? Just for simplicity. And, and of course, you need to know the port of the request, of the server, because all the requests from the client will need to go to that port, okay? We type them manually here, 3000, okay? The default is 80 for HTTP, 443 for HTTPS. They are ports that can be used only by the super user and so on, and a lot of issues. We are not going to use those ports because we are just, let's say, developing an application, and we are not really interested in making it available in production. But if you need to do that, we will need to change those ports. And by the way, you can use different ports also in production with some caveats, okay? Okay, good. So, Express can be extended. So it's a very modular system, and you can add middlewares that basically are functions that take the request and the response, and they get a next call to be called to go on to process it in the next middleware. And basically, they are useful to add new functionalities in the server, okay? I don't want to to stay too much on these things. Let's just see a couple of useful middlewares. Like static, okay, app use, you add it, and basically every request will be passed to this Express static middleware. So this comes from Express. You don't have to import anything in addition. And see, you saw that we had to write a function for each URL. If you just want to serve local files, you should write a function that basically it's a parametric URL, and it looks if the file is present and so on. It's so common that Express already provides you a function that already does this operation for you, okay? We are not going to use this except maybe in a very, very simple case later on in the course, but I mean not for the exam for sure, okay? And the other thing which instead is important is that we can have URLs which are more complex, that includes parameters. I told you before, I want to buy item number 4. I want to book the first seat in the theater, and so on, okay? But I don't want to write an API that only works for a specific seat, item, and so on, okay? So I need to pass some dynamic information like an ID, numbers, and so on. And this can be encoded both in the body and as well as in the URL. It depends on how we design the APIs, which is the topic that we are going to address in a few minutes, okay? But what I want to tell you is that if you use the standard ways of encoding these parameters, either in the body or in the URL, Express already extracts them for you, okay? So rec object has a property query that extracts everything that comes after the question mark in a URL, okay? They can be useful for the GET requests, since you cannot have a body, okay, with the GET. With the POST, you can have the body, and so you have .body, and .body, if it's in a format that can be understood by Express, in particular JSON, if we use the middleware express JSON, it will be parsed automatically. So in body, you already find all the keys that you have passed as body inside the request. Post, put, delete. I mean, delete not so useful, but you can. Okay. Path can also be expressed in a parametric form, well, with the regular expression, okay, but I mean, maybe it's not so useful. What instead is very, very useful, and we will use it a lot in our course, is that you can make one or more parts of the path parametric, using simply the column syntax, okay? Users, column, user ID. So user ID is not a string, it's just a name of something that you can use later on in reg params, okay? It's it's defined, sorry, by who wrote the route, okay? And so here you can have any string. This route will match user slash any string slash books slash any string. It can also be a number. Remember, okay, numbers are just characters, so they can be matched here as well, okay? And they are available in reg params, okay? You can specify regexp, but I mean, maybe not so useful, okay? So very, very useful because we will write a lot of parametric APIs, so with parametric URLs, okay? But of course, we need to, let's say, use it in an example to understand them better. Last thing, login middleware. You already saw it before the break because I took the wrong example, but there's a very useful login middleware which is called Morgan. Very useful to use, import Morgan, so it's a package to be installed. App use Morgan with the dev option, so it basically prints everything it receives, okay? So we saw it, so we can close this one. Okay, node index and node index has this app use Morgan dev, which has been installed, hopefully. Yes, otherwise the import would fail. And you see that when we do requests, no, it was 3001. Okay. You see it logs the requests, okay? It logs the status code 200, okay? Also 404 not found, okay? Because the browser sent 2 requests. We didn't tell the browser to send the second request. It sent it. It went to the server answered. So it's another request. It has been logged, okay? Very useful to debug things, okay? Good. Okay. There are other middlewares, but I invite you, I would say, not to use them because typically they are not needed in our course, okay? There are a couple of others that we will use later on in the course, and of course we will show them and we will explain them, like course and the passport, okay? One is for cross origin request resource sharing, and it's a topic we are going to discuss later on, and passport for the authentication, okay? So that's all for Express, and now we can focus on the APIs, which is a very, very important topic for this course, okay? So the glue between the client and the servers, I mean server business logic, I would say. So that's the situation we have. We have the application, okay? And we need to somehow communicate with the server, okay? So this line is sort of, it's like the network, okay? The application acts as the client, can be the web front end, can be anything else, your mobile application, an IoT device, a backend as well, okay? But forget about this for a moment, okay? And we said in this course we are going to exchange information encoded in JSON. Why? Because it's simple. And it's also used in practice many places. So just a very quick overview of JSON, but you will see it's not so difficult. JSON is a lightweight data interchange format that stands for JavaScript Object Notation, pronounced JSON. Okay. Easy for humans to read and write, easy for machine to pass and generate, and so on. So good for everybody. Okay. I would say other option could be like XML. XML is good for machines. It is a little bit more verbose, but it's much more difficult for users to read, right? Because there are these tags, open, close, and so on. Here, it's more or less like, let's just see an example. It's more or less like you declare objects in JavaScript. Just a few more restrictions, okay? But, I mean, it's so easy to read, right? Especially if you format it correctly. So you got a new line for each new keys and so on. So the structure is, there are primitive types, less than JavaScript, okay? Strings, numbers, true, false, null. So there's no undefined, okay? And there are composite types, arrays and objects, but of course no functions. It doesn't make sense to transfer functions. What do you transfer for a function? The code. But if the platform doesn't run JavaScript, does it make sense? And would you trust running a code coming from outside your computer? Probably not. So it doesn't make sense to transfer functions, okay? And of course, you cannot transfer references. If you want to transfer an array, you need to explicitly say what's inside the array. References are for the local system because you have access to the memory. And so a reference is like a pointer inside the memory. Okay. Just be aware of the fact that string must use the double quote, not the single quote, so it's not JavaScript. That's the most common cause of errors, okay? When you have an issue with JSON, often you forgot that you need the double quotes and not the single quotes, okay? But, I mean, very simple to detect. Arrays, you open the square bracket and you declare everything with a comma, and objects is very simple, is very similar to JavaScript. You open the curly brackets. Keys are strings, okay? So it must be quoted with a double quote, okay? There's a limitation that we have in JavaScript. So everything has to be a key, so a string. So example, first name, last name, address. Address can be another object. So you can recursively insert objects and arrays inside keys and elements of the arrays in JSON, okay? This is an array of string. This is a number, so numbers have no quotes. Good. Expected, I would say. Okay? So pretty easy to understand. Note there is not the last comma here. This is an error. But I mean, it is just you know, an issue that you discover quickly. I mean, just parsing error when you parse the JSON. And the environments often highlight that this is an error because they cannot parse JSON and so on, okay? Actually, how can you use the JSON format? Well, it's already integrated in JavaScript. There is this JSON object, all uppercase. You don't have to import any package. It's already there. It's in JavaScript, in the JavaScript environment. So you have two methods, stringify and parse, okay? Stringify takes anything in JavaScript and converts it to a string that is a JSON representation of what you passed, okay? And it works recursively, also nested object and array. So if you have an object which arrays and so on, you just pass the reference to the object, and everything that is represented there, excluding functions and undefined, I think, yes, and undefined, the rest is converted into JSON. And once you have a string that represents JSON, that is encoded in JSON format, you can parse it, okay? JSON parse, and it will return what is represented by the string. If it's a number, it returns a number. If it's a string, it returns a string. If it's an array, it returns an array. If it's an object, it returns an object, okay? So if it starts with the square bracket, it's an array, and the return value will be an array. Okay? The object prototype we forget. We don't use it, so no problem for that. Okay? So very easy to use. There are already two methods ready to be used. Okay? Stringify which, by the way, sometimes is useful also for debugging, because you want to print a complex object, just console log JSON stringify the object. Just a side note. And when you receive on the server or the client some JSON data, you just parse it in this way, okay? And you will see, we will not even parse it because the libraries will do the parsing for us anyway. And then, after we have a way to transfer information, we need to define URLs representing service endpoints. Do you want to add an item to a list? We need a URL and an HTTP method to do that. You want to retrieve the list of items? Again, we need a method, a HTTP method, and a URL, and so on. Okay? This depends on your application. If you're handling an online shop, of course you want a method to list all the items, a method to get more information about the item, a method to add it to a cart, a method to do the checkout, and so on. Actually, I said method, I mean an endpoint, okay? That is composed by an HTTP method and a URL, okay? So you want something to call on the server to perform the actions, okay? And this strongly depends on the application. Okay, so now we are going to discuss this point, which is very important, okay? We can have many types of URLs. I mean, in principle, you can write whatever you want in the URLs. But if we have some rules, we try to give you some guidelines. If you follow them, let's say we appreciate it, and they also make the application easier to understand, both for us and for you, okay? It's not really mandatory, but I would say if you don't know where to start and you want to do something which is, let's say, it's more or less well designed, probably you should start following these guidelines. And then maybe if you think there is a better way, you want to deviate a little bit because there is a special case and so on, you can consider these options. And remember, we are always available in the lab to discuss these choices and so on, okay? So if you have alternative ideas, we can discuss them. So URLs in applications, web applications, mostly represent collections or single elements, okay? So collections, API Polito.it, students, courses, okay? Items, objects to buy, okay, in the shop, or seats, places, if you want to book something like in the theater and so on, okay? And then maybe you want to address, operate on a single element. Well, the URL that we recommend to operate on single elements or single item is to have the name of the collection and then the identifier of the element. So it means that you need a unique identifier for this element, okay? So it's like students. Students have the student ID, okay, as 1, 2, 3, 4, and so on. Courses has this very long code, okay, that uniquely identifies this the course, okay, or the object you want to buy in a shop has some unique ID that has been given by the merchant, by the one who sells it, or like you go to Amazon, it has its own ID, or you buy something, that each object nowadays has a barcode with some unique IDs and so on, okay? As long as the ID is unique, so it can identify your object, it's fine, okay? Good. So that's the way we recommend to design URLs, okay? Best practice, use nouns, not verbs. Use plural nouns, and you use concrete names, or not items, but just because after a while you don't remember what item is. You have an application handling students at the Politecnico. Is the item the student, the course, the room? I don't remember. If I call it rooms, of course it's rooms, right? If I call it students, they are students. Okay, good. And then we need the operations. Operations that are basically the typical operation you do when you manipulate data. Retrieve information, add information, update information, delete information, search information, and so on. Okay? Good. And so now we have all the parts that are needed to build an API. Okay? So actions in HTTP are represented by the name of the method. Okay? Get, we already saw get, retrieve information. Post, send information. Put is updating information. Delete is deleting information. Okay? And the rest, we can implement the rest with some variants on these methods. So, action you can have on resources, collections or single element. If you do get with the URL for a collection, you get the list of all the items. Get courses, all the courses at the Politecnico. Okay? They might be a lot. We might want to filter later. Okay, that's true, but just as an example, get students, all the students. Okay? Get items to be bought, all the items that can be sold by the shop. Okay? Single element retrieves the properties, the information that is related to the element. Get student S1234 gets the name, first name, last name, the date of birth, I don't know, the exams that have been passed and so on, whatever you want. Okay? Post add a new element to the collection. Okay? So there's a new student enrolled at the Politecnico, we need to add it. Of course, that's the issue, who can add it, so who can call this API and so on, that's for later, okay? But, I mean, it's a web application. In the office, in the admin offices, you go there, hello, I'm the new student, that's my ID and so on, that's my first name, last name and so on. They enter all the information, they send a put request to a server with all the information, okay? Where? In the body of the request. And which is the URL that you use? /students, exactly as with the get. The server will distinguish the two because they arrive with two different HTTP methods. So there's no problem in using the same URL with different HTTP methods. Okay? Actually, I must say it's quite typical to have the same URL, and with get you get a list, and with post you add something to that list. And it doesn't make sense to post on a single element. Okay? Instead, you do the put on a single element because the semantic of the put is to update information on a certain element. Okay? So let's say you changed your address, your home address. Okay? You tell the admin offices, well, please update my home address. Okay, you already exist in the system, and so they need to change a value inside the properties of your element, that is means the student. Okay, so /student /1234, etc. And we send in the body the new information, the new address, and the new address will be stored in the database. Okay? And in this case, it doesn't make that much sense to update an entire collection. Okay? Even though in principle it's possible, but I mean, updating the whole collection is probably something you might want to add differently, okay? Maybe with the method that, I mean, with a different URL, okay? Because it's doing a lot of things together. If they fail, if only one of the elements fails, and so on, there are a lot of things to think about. Last thing, delete. Delete the element, of course, for the single element. I provide the ID. Delete the students from the list of active students because you graduated, okay? Not because you left, okay? And so at a certain point, you send a delete with URL students /S1234, etc. And it gets taken out from the list. So this information is stored in the database. So actually, the database drops this line from the table, maybe. again, it doesn't make that much sense to delete an entire collection, even though, I mean, in principle it's possible. But what we recommend is using these 5 cases, right? So get, collection, and single element, post on the collection to create an element, and then put and delete on the single element to update and delete the element. Okay? It's very important to recall. Okay? Example, this is done with dogs, not to do example with students. So let's say a list of dogs. Okay? Get the list of dogs, show info about the dog with a certain ID, create a new dog item. Okay, avoid these cases. If exists, update the info about the dog number 12, because that's the ID you put in the URL, or delete it. Okay? There are guidelines to do URL design. Okay? I mean, again, this is just advice we give. I mean, if you don't know what to do, maybe it's worth having a look. But if you have clear ideas what you want to do, that's fine, as long as you more or less follow these guidelines. I mean, the guidelines I just gave you by speaking, okay? Which are very simple, okay? Collections, elements, and IDs, in case you need to specify a specific element, okay? We still have one more complex case, because sometimes you want to have to model a relationship, right? So, like students, S1, 2, 3, 4, courses inside the study plan, courses that have already been passed, and so on, okay? So you might want to have a bit longer URLs when you have relationships, okay? And note that this can be different depending on what you want. If you put courses, an idea of the course students, maybe you want a different thing, like all the students enrolled in a course. While with the previous URL, you want all the courses that are in the study plan of a certain student, okay? So you start reading the URL from left to right, okay? Again, these are guidelines. You might have like a string like student courses / 01, etc., okay? It's not forbidden. It makes things a bit more difficult to understand later, okay? But as long as things are clear, we are okay with your proposals, okay? There are standards for this. We don't impose these standards anymore. We tried in the first edition of the course. That is the so-called REST standard, but we are not enforcing it, okay? We are glad if you follow it, but I mean, we are not explaining it anymore. And they are basically it's what I told you, okay? But I mean, we don't pretend you to use it for the exam, okay? As long as you design good APIs. Okay, sometimes you need to do complex searches. Like I told you, I don't want all the students of the Politecnico. There are, I don't know, maybe 40,000, something like this, are currently enrolled, right? And so maybe I want to filter those students. Where do I put the filter? Again, this is another question open for debate, okay? That's our suggestion. If you have the collection and you want to filter it, well, of course you can do / and write something, okay? It's not forbidden. But maybe for a filter that applies to a collection, you may want to use the syntax that was the standard syntax since the old days of the web. So use the question mark, and everything that comes after a question mark in a URL is parametric and is typically used to do filtering, okay? So you can have parameter equal to value and another parameter equal to some value, and so on, okay? So this syntax is quite flexible, and it can be used to do filtering on more than one property. And the good news is also that this can be automatically parsed by all the libraries that we have. So Express and yeah, mostly Express because we have only Express on the server. Okay, So the parameter goes as a property, say the rec query property that we saw before, automatically. Okay, we don't have to write a single line of code, and that's the goodness of using this kind of syntax. Okay, you just need to construct this URL from the client side. Okay, so I think that's all from the URL point of view. Let's see the responses. In part, we already saw them. When you have errors, meaningful HTTP status call should be returned. We already saw the 404, which is super famous. Okay? You can also have a response body to give additional information about the error. Okay? That's not wrong. It's possible, and sometimes it's also useful. Okay? Because user well, 404 is probably nothing else to be sent back, but like internal server error. Okay, but I mean, it's my fault. It's their fault. It's a temporary error. Should I try later and so on? I mean, database connection error. You could write something like this. So it's not your fault. We have a problem with the database. Just wait. Okay. And then on the client side, you decide what to show. I mean, this is just information that passes at the HTTP level, okay? And then the application decides if it wants to show it to the user or which users wants to, what the application wants to do with this information, okay? So, up to you. Let's say in the beginning, you probably start without thinking too much about errors. As in any programming language, you try to make things work. And then afterwards, after things more or less work for the cases you are interested in, you think about what can go wrong. Okay? And then you might want to think how to handle errors in that case. Okay? Good. We will give you some advice on how to handle at least the main errors that might happen in web applications. Okay? So again, different organizations have different guidelines about how to create, write APIs, internally, externally, and so on. Okay? Sometimes APIs are exposed externally because you want users to be able to use the APIs. Think about all these AI systems, okay? You use these AI systems inside another application, like the Visual Studio Code or whatever system you use to develop. They interact with the AI system through APIs. So somebody has designed the APIs. An API that maybe takes a request and gives you the answer. And it tells that, I mean, you exceeded your quota because you made too many requests. You didn't pay, so you're not authenticated. I don't answer you. Or whatever, it gives you the answer that you requested. Okay? Or it tells you, I'm thinking, wait a little bit more, and so on. Okay? So APIs are a general mechanism. And that's why we're stressing them so much. And we are designing them also from scratch in this course because this is the only course about web application you have in your course of study. So it's important that you understand how API works, also because they are a point of potential vulnerability on the server side. Okay? And APIs which are designed in a good way are already solving most of the problems that could happen on the server in terms of security. Okay? So, last topic, and then we'll code a little bit. Okay? How do we implement API in Express? Actually, an API is just an HTTP request. No difference from what we already did. Slash, we just write slash courses. That's an API. Okay? The API is a logical concept. It's not a different method that we need to use. Okay? Maybe we need to be a little bit more careful about the URL. That's why we discuss the URLs. Maybe we want to use parametric URLs. Okay? You want to get information about a specific item in the collection, you need to provide the ID. Where do you provide the ID? Get has no body in the request. So you need to provide it into the URL. So you need to have a parametric URL. And then we need to handle this JSON communication. So parsing the JSON coming from the server, coming from the client and creating JSON as a response from the server. Then when we are on the client, we do the opposite, okay? So in the request, like in a post, create a new student. First name, last name, and so on. We get a JSON string. Somebody has to parse it to make all the fields available in JavaScript so that then we can run an insert in the database. Somebody has to parse this JSON. We have a middleware by Express itself. It's called Express.json. We will see how to use it. Just use Express.json. If the content type, so if the header of the request includes content type application JSON, the content will be parsed as JSON string. And so in rec body, you will find all keys that correspond to the keys that you have in the JSON. For the response is even more easy. Rest.json, one of the methods we saw before the break. We just put the variable inside the rest JSON, so there's a parameter here between the braces, the brackets, and everything happens automatically. Okay, so Express insert content type application JSON in the response in the header of the HTTP protocol, and it just sends in the body the string that corresponds to the JSON. Okay. And then there's the issue of validation of the input parameters, but that's for the next lecture. Okay, so let's see very simple stuff. Get on a collection. Well, a collection, just the name of the collection. Rec res, and then you do whatever you want. Typically, you go to the database and search for the information. You wait for the information, and then rest JSON of the information. You send it back to the client. Okay. Of course, this is the most simple example. This is public information. No need to check who is doing the request, if you are allowed to do the request, and so on. Okay? Very, very simple example. The opposite, post, create an element. Post answers, I want to create a new answer. So rec res, in the body, there will be the information about the answer, already parsed by the Express.json middleware. So I need to put at the beginning of the file use Express.json. It tells Express to include this middleware. So basically, this middleware does only one thing: checks if a header in the HTTP is present, content type application JSON. If it's present, it kicks in, it comes in and says, okay, the body is mine, it's a string. I try to parse it in assuming it's JSON format. And I make it available as rec body, okay? So you'll find the keys, first name, last name, address, and whatever, okay? And you take this information and you use it. Typically, you go to the database and you do an insert, okay? Elements, get answers, parametric URL, :ID. So this ID will be substituted at runtime when the callback is called with the actual value available as rec params ID. So this can be any string, okay? It can be a number, can be a string, a mix of numbers and strings, and so on. And typically, you go to the database and you do a query. Select where answer ID equal to what you got from the parameter. And then you got information, and as before, rest JSON of the information. Everything is done automatically. So I hope you now appreciate the powerfulness of this library, this Express library, okay? How do we test the APIs? Because we still don't have a client. It's an issue, right? So I just did a trick before the break. I opened the browser, I sent a request, that's fine, but just with the browser, with the URL, I can only send one type of request, only GET requests, because typing in the URL bar makes the browser create GET HTTP request. I cannot create post request, I cannot create put request, I cannot create delete requests, okay? So I need something else to create those types of requests. What I recommend is this extension for the Visual Studio Code. It's probably the easiest way to work with this requests, which are not GET requests, and there you can customize whatever you want, including headers, so content type, application, JSON, etc., the body of the request, etc. There are many other extensions, okay? Even for browsers. A few years ago, we recommended something out for the browser, but then people get confused. So, I mean, any client that speaks HTTP can make requests to an HTTP server, okay? So it can be an outside program, like there is wget, curl, whatever programs you can use to create HTTP requests. Of course, there are browsers, but they have this limitation, okay? Sending a post request is almost impossible from the interface without extensions, or any other system, any other program that you might want to, that you might find. And since we are developing inside Visual Studio Code, if we have an extension in Visual Studio Code, it's the best thing, okay? Because it's easier to use, okay? Just create a file with HTTP extension, separate with 3 hashes sign, and you write the request. So the first line and the headers in case it's needed, and the body in case it's needed, okay? We see some examples because we finished here, okay? So these files are already online for today's lecture, as usual. No, it was there. Well, anyway. Lecture example, week 3. You see how many things go on when you are using a web application, right? Because GitHub, almost all websites today are web application. Week 3, QA server v1, and so these are the files we are going to use today, okay? We already saw the first example and the index, and we have a look at the files now and see what we can do, okay? So let's stop the other server just for clarity, okay? But no, that's the index. That's what we want to use, okay? So index, express, Morgan, okay? We're also importing from another file. Why? Just because we want to use the database, it's better to keep a little bit of order inside your code, okay? Not to have SQL queries inside the file that is handling routes and APIs from the client and so on, okay? So we learned modules, so that's probably the first application where these modules are useful for us, and we write 2 files instead of 1. So I already wrote this file called DAO, Data Access Object, so it's just a JavaScript file, okay? Which does more or less what you did in the last lab, or some of you will do today, okay? Open the database and provide functions which return promises that run queries on the database, okay? Very simple here. List questions. Well, I think we have list answers as well. Create answer, insert, and no, this was this answer by question. So we already have 2 tables, okay? But this is quite easy to write, right? So export and the queries and so on. Once you write one, you can just copy pasting. You make sure the one is correct. You can ask us during the lab or see the solutions, and then you copy paste and more or less you adapt to the other cases, okay? Maybe you have a template for the select, you have a template for the insert, update, delete, which are a little bit different because simply the select returns a table, so you want to use the DB all, and the other doesn't return a table, so you want to use the DB run, okay? And don't forget to use function, okay, instead of the arrow function, because you might want to use the this inside the callback, okay? So just to recall the issues of the this. But I mean, DAO is just a set of functions. Do a select and do an insert. And so index is the important file for us today. App express, use the Morgan just for logging. Use express.json to automatically decode incoming JSON, okay? Because in the real application later on, and also with this REST client, we will send data formatted in JSON format, okay? So of course, this get is slash is useless, it's just to play, okay? Just to make sure it works. And then you have like get API questions. You see, we don't care about the request. I mean, if we are here, somebody has called API questions. What we need to do is then res JSON, okay? With the answer we get from the database, thou list questions, and it will be an array, okay? That it will be converted by JSON automatically into a JSON string, okay? And then since I like handling a little bit of handling errors, at least the most important errors, let's say when you use a promise, it's always good to have a catch, okay, at the end. So at least you can say, well, something didn't work. Then maybe you can be more specific. You can send a JSON object with some information and so on. But you see here, status 500. If I don't put status, the status is assumed by default 200. Everything is okay, okay? If I put a status, of course, the Express will use the status I decided, okay? The 500. Of course, 404 is not appropriate here. The result, the URL is valid. So it's not like we didn't find anything. Just we had some issues. Actually, if we are in the cache, we don't expect to be in the cache. We don't really know what's happening. So that's a famous internal server error. We have no idea, okay? Say it in other words. Okay, let's try this API. How do we try it? Well, as we did before. Actually, we have the browser, right? So, I close it. Localhost, it's 3001 slash question. No, it was API question or questions, I think. Oh, API questions, sorry. So it's better to have a prefix. Again, just for clarity, not really needed, but in case you have a web server that does many other things, if you do slash API, you remember that is an API that returns data, okay? But not really mandatory. Just good practice. API questions, okay? I don't like sending requests without opening this part, okay? So I redo the operation. Oops, let me make it a bit bigger. Well, okay, the one in the upper part, but the one in the lower part as well. So the fab icon, we don't care, okay? Get localhost 3001 API questions. That's the request headers here. You see localhost and so on, all the stuff we saw before, but we don't really care. Okay, it's just a get. We didn't send anything in the body. So, all these headers are mostly useless for us on the server side. Okay, and we got the response. That's the body of the response. You saw the row. Okay, if I don't have the row, the browser is kind enough to parse the JSON for us. Okay, but have a look at the raw file. There are no new lines because, computer doesn't care about the new line, okay? So I just care about creating a compact way, a compact string, okay, to send less information. Good, and so this is the JSON that corresponds to the question that has been retrieved by the database, okay? Okay, let's have a look at the response headers. I want you to see one thing. Content type application JSON. Okay? This has been automatically inserted by Express. It's very important. Without this, the browser will not understand it's JSON, and it doesn't show us the parsing options and so on, okay? I mean, it's not the browser, but later on, it's our application will not understand it's JSON, okay? That's a bigger problem. And so why you see JSON and so on? Because the browser is so kind that if it's a JSON content, it has some code that handles JSON just because it wants us to show something nice, okay? It's not required. Just some browsers are, the most common browsers can handle JSON data just to show us in a good way what has been returned by the server. Otherwise, you just see the answer from the server, okay? But this is the browser. Let's try to use the extension, okay? You remember the REST client. You just install it, okay? And then hopefully it works. Hopefully not like the SQLite 3. Some of you had problems, but there is another extension. The other extension is working, okay? There are two that you can try in the lab. If you have problems, just ask us. So how do we use it? Well, very, very simple. Just create a file.http, and the extension kicks in automatically. You don't have to do anything. It recognizes the .http extension. The file is just a text file. It just simply gives us this little string that you can click, and you can basically send this request to the server. So let's click and see what happens. Click, okay? And it sends the request to the server, and here we see the response. Of course, this is not a browser. It's not so nice in terms of the interface, but this is exactly what comes out on the TCP connection for the response of the HTTP protocol. So you'll see the first line, the status, the content type, everything that we already saw before in the browser, the empty line, and the body, okay? And this, again, the extension is nice because it allows us to parse a little bit the JSON format, okay? Okay, good. So we can do the same with all the other, you can close the response, with all the other APIs, okay? So let's try the post, okay? The post is a bit different, right? Because the post creates an item. And the post cannot be sent by the browser, so you need to use this extension. So let's go on and try the post. You see, the post requires to write a bit more characters, because you need post, the URL, but also the header, and this is mandatory. Without this, it will not work, because the server side doesn't understand the JSON, so it cannot parse it. And because it cannot just guess a JSON. Somebody has to tell it. And we have a body. And the body is in JSON format. We need to write the JSON ourselves here in this very simple extension, okay? It's not JavaScript, it's just a text file. So it's a string, and we write a string. Of course, we can use additional spaces, new lines, and so on, so it's easier to read for us, and no problem in parsing, okay? So let's try to send this post. Click. Okay, what we get back depends on the API. We decided to get back the ID of the newly created object in the database, okay? Which is actually, as you see, it's actually JSON, just a JSON that represents a very simple content that is just a number. A number, like a string, is a valid JSON, okay? Or you can have arrays and objects, okay? So you don't have to be concerned about the fact, well, should I use JSON or not? Well, basically everything you return is a JSON. It can be interpreted as a JSON because it's either a number, a string, or something more complex, and so use the JSON, okay? And you see here in the login, post, API answers, and so on. And if you go, oh, by the way, you see 201 created, okay? Not 200, but the 200 series is always okay, okay? Just more details. Let's see the code, and then I think we are almost done. Index, post, you see 201. I decided to return 201. Otherwise, it would have been 200, okay? And the new ID that came out from this function, create answer, you can look at the, well, let's look at it. Okay, new answer at a certain point resolve this last ID. So it's a promise. Remember, it's a promise. It's an async function. It's a promise, a resolved promise. It carries a value, and the value is just a number. Fine. Okay. How do we take it? This last ID, because we are using the SQLite tree that gives this last ID for the insert, update, delete. Okay? Well, delete maybe not. Okay, and post. You see, answer. Where do the field answer come from? Rec body. Okay, rec body. Question ID, score date, text responded are exactly what we wrote here. Text responded, score date, question ID. Okay? Because internally, the middleware, Express JSON, already parsed the JSON and made every key available as a property of the object rec body. And then we just assigned it to a new object because maybe we wanted to change the names or whatever. We pass it to the function that operates on the DB. We create a new object, the new line, actually the new row in the DB. Okay? Just out of curiosity, let's have a look at the DB. Hopefully it opens. No, it doesn't collaborate. The DB, well, it doesn't. Let's stop the server. Well, okay. It's probably time to stop the lecture, right? I mean, there will be a fifth row, okay, with the new information. I'm not sure why it doesn't work now. Oh, okay, you see, 5 text of the new answer, Bob, and so on. That is what we wrote here. Okay, I have no idea why it didn't open. Sometimes, you know, computers are like this. So I think it's more or less all, right? So we are able to design APIs. So first of all, your brain decides HTTP method and the URL, and then you implement it in the code. Okay, post, get, and so on. The URL. Oh, yeah, maybe we forgot well, the parametric one, but parametric one is easy, right? Rec params ID, and that's all. Okay, and then you test it. You test it with the REST client. Okay? At the moment, we have no other option. So next week, lab for the next week will be to transform the functions that you implemented this week, read the list of fields, add the field, and so on in the database. You transform them into APIs of a web server. Okay? So we are constructing more or less the server side of our application. Week after, we will make sure APIs are strong enough or secure enough, and then we will put them aside, and when we will start working on the client side. Okay? Good. If you have any questions or comments or issues, just feel free to ask. Otherwise, I think we can stop here. Okay? And with some of you, we'll meet at 2:30 p.m. in the lab. Otherwise, we will meet on Monday, okay, for next lecture. Thank you.